So welcome everyone to the, I can't even do it now. All right, one more time. All right. So welcome everyone to the youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology YouTube channel. We're continuing with the series that I've been doing, the planets per ascendant, and today and for the next several videos we're going to be looking at Aquarius ascendant and the planets for Aquarius ascendant. Now, so far you've heard from a few of the astrological apprenticeship students, year 3 astrological apprenticeship students, Fernando and Fiona. And today we have Desi from Bulgaria and Kim from somewhere out west in the US. And they're also year 3 astrological apprenticeship students. And they're going to be talking with me about Saturn for an Aquarius ascendant. So before we get into that though, you two jumped on Aquarius to talk about Aquarius. It may be that I don't necessarily remember your charts, but is it because you are Aquarius ascendants?
No.
No? Okay. Well, anyway, Kim, you are?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is a Saturn-ruled ascendant, and so usually there will be a greater sense of heaviness with this. And as we go through Aquarius ascendant in general, again, remember what we're doing is we're essentially taking the planets, such as Saturn, and we're considering what does it mean that Saturn rules over the 1st house and the 12th house for an Aquarius ascendant. And we're also going to be looking at what does it mean that Saturn then is debilitated in the 3rd? What does that tell us about Aquarius? And that Saturn is exalted in the 9th. And the goal is to see if we're going to manifest the higher qualities and the higher potentials of Saturn for an Aquarius ascendant, we will tend to need to act and live more like that Saturn, the exaltation position of Saturn, and we'll need to be aware of the issues about the qualities of Saturn being debilitated in the 3rd house. So first off, I'll get started with this whole idea of Saturn ruling the 1st and the 12th, and we'll see what Desi and Kim has to add to this. So we've got Saturn ruling the 1st and the 12th. Aquarius actually is one of the hardest ascendants for me to get my mind around. I don't know why. I've spent, well, years studying astrology, and every time I come to Aquarius or I think about Aquarius or I have an Aquarius client, for some reason, it's always perplexing to me. But the more I thought about it with this idea of having Saturn ruling the 1st and the 12th, most people have this idea of Aquarius as being self-sacrificing, as being an ascendant or a type of individual who they're supposed to be contributing to the greater good of a larger society, a larger network, 11th house things, because again, Aquarius is the natural 11th sign of the zodiac. But we have Saturn ruling over the 1st, which is the ascendant, the body, the path, the personality, and the 12th, which is a house of loss, a house of surrender, a house of charity, a house of giving. So this is one of those reasons why we find Aquarius ascendants tend to gravitate towards those kinds of roles or be pulled into those kinds of roles of serving others and contributing to the greater good of society. Aquarius ascendants can be very, they like to be behind the scenes. They can be very aloof. They can be very distant. It can be hard to get to know an Aquarius ascendant because the 1st house is ruled over by Saturn, again, a planet of distance, of aloofness, of coldness, and their ascendant lord rules over the 12th house, which tends to pull people away from a more active life. So this is one of the reasons why Aquarius has always been sort of perplexing to me, because they're supposed to be out in the world doing things, but they're also can be very behind the scenes, very shy, very personal in keeping things to themselves. So since Kim is an Aquarius ascendant, we'll start with you, Kim. When you think about the fact that Saturn rules over the 1st and the 12th house, what kind of insights does that bring up for you, and what kind of things could you share with people tuning in today?
Well, you kind of nailed it. It's like you have the person and loss, or the person and loneliness. When I started studying astrology, I almost fell off my stool when I learned that Saturn ruled Aquarius, because here you have this like cranky loner that is in charge of kind of getting groups together and making things move, and I couldn't like reconcile the two of those. Like, I think it then brings the personality of like if Aquarius isn't working right, they're the person that's like, oh, you like that? I'm not into that anymore. Or, you know, they just want to be alone and different if it's not working right. But then if it is kind of the best Saturn, they can identify with everyone within a group and sort of motivate from within it. More of almost like a union worker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the opposite of the sun.
Right. And I like that you brought up, you didn't specifically say it, but you brought up the idea of contrariness. You know, when you're in a group, you know, if someone gets into something, all of a sudden, you know, you don't like it. And one of those other qualities of Aquarius is this idea of, in a sense, breaking new ground, being a pioneer of sorts. And that's because as they develop groups, as the group grows, just like a plant grows, you know, eventually they have to sort of like, you know, leave the old leaves behind, or if a snake has to shed its skin, so it gets tired of it and moves on to the next thing. So it's good that you brought up that idea of contrariness. So Desi, do you have anything to add to that? Any ideas or insights about this whole idea of how Saturn rules the 1st and the 12th house and how that works for an Aquarius ascendant?
It's a positive planet for Aquarius, considering that Saturn is ruling the 1st house. And maybe I'm too optimistic, but for a Saturn ruled sign, there is hope, maybe even thanks to Mercury and Venus,
Right,
and which can help Saturn grow its potential. And I have not met too many Aquarius ascendants, but I feel like if they can, if they are committed to the benefit use of Venus and Mercury, and committed to developing the positive qualities of Saturn, things can go quite well because of the exaltation in the 9th house.
right, right. And so the good point you brought up there is this idea of Saturn being positive for the Aquarius ascendant, because oftentimes people think about Saturn ruled ascendants as being more difficult. And you know, one of the things that Saturn does for the Aquarius ascendant is it gives the person the capacity to be positive even in dire circumstances. And it's not the kind of optimism like where they just have false hope for things. It's the sense of kind of moving forward, that one will get through this, that changes will occur, but we will get through this. And I think that's important for Aquarius ascendant because, again, going back to the idea of contrariness, not only does Aquarius have this capacity for contrariness, that can be translated into the idea of being comfortable with change and challenging new things. And then the point you brought up about Mercury and Venus, we'll get to that when we talk about Mercury and Venus for an Aquarius ascendant. But those two planets, they do help the Saturn-ruled signs, number one, with Mercury, manage the difficulties better. And with Venus, it gives them the capacity to appreciate how to learn and grow from those difficulties. So one thing you said about the exaltation position being the 9th house, you know, we do know that when we have a planet exalted in the 9th, it tends to benefit the dharma and the path for that person. So again, that is the main reason why Saturn can be very positive, aside from the fact that it rules the ascendant, is because by tapping into the qualities of Saturn, it allows the person to act as though they've got that exalted Saturn in the 9th house, because it gives them the ability to be committed to their dharma, to their purpose, no matter what kind of distractions or difficulties arise. So to kind of bring it around to you, Kim, let's go ahead and focus on this idea of the exaltation position of Saturn exalted in the 9th. So that's the 1st Lord and 12th Lord exalted in the 9th. What kind of ideas does that bring up for you? or does it?
It does. It brings a lot. It sort of strengthens again that Saturn's best at being alone. Like he needs his beliefs and his personal convictions to get him through these bigger group issues. And if he doesn't have that, again, you know, that's the good Saturn. The tricky Saturn will use that to his advantage. And just, you know, Saturn can feel alone in a huge group of people. So if he can't have that faith and that belief to get him through to the end game, he's going to be, what can I get out of this?
Right.
Trying to make it like for himself.
Right. And that goes back to, you know, the idea of debilitation in the third house, because the third house deals with our personal interests. And when there's too much of a focus on that, then the Saturn ruled ascendant Aquarius tends to suffer. But, you know, one thing you mentioned, and I want to just really emphasize that the kind of, in a sense, optimism that Saturn has isn't everything's going to be all right.
Right.
As everything's going to be perfect. It's the optimism is we'll get through it, right? Mm-hmm. That's two different kinds. You know, the optimism of, oh, don't worry about it. I'm sure it's all going to work out just fine. That's not the kind of optimism Saturn ruled ascendants has. Not the kind of optimism Aquarius has. It's more like
this won't kill you.
Yeah, you'll make it through somehow. Sure, you might lose your leg, but you'll still be alive. You know. So Desi, to take it to the idea from. Well, first, I guess I should ask, do you have any other insights or ideas just focusing on this idea of Saturn and how it works with its exaltation, being in the ninth house and being in the sign of Libra? You know, what other kind of insights does that stimulate for you? Or does it?
I'm not sure about insights about being in Libra, because with Libra there has to be a trade, an exchange.
Right.
And with Saturn, there's the need for stability and one committed path that a person follows in order to feel comfortable, in order to grow. So again, because it's Venus sign, perhaps is nurturing Saturn in a way.
Right.
A person could be nurturing a larger society, or could be nurturing their culture. They could be a nurturer in a Saturnian way.
Exactly, and you know, the idea of sternness, but I think it also brings up consistency. You know, so with that Aquarius ascendant, they're able to nurture their culture. They're able to nurture their purpose in a Saturnine way, slowly and steadily over time. And it also applies for an Aquarius ascendant related to marriage, in that with that idea of Saturn being exalted in the ninth, it gives the ability for the person to really develop a solid, consistent marriage path that might not be as romantic as you would want it to be, even though it's a Saturn sign. But it's that kind of love that grows through shared experiences, where you make it 10, 20 years down the road and you feel a sense of commitment, connection, because you have steadily been committed and walked this path with another person. So I'm glad you brought up the idea of nurturing, because many people don't necessarily think of Saturn-ruled signs as nurturing. But again, the nurturing is not flooding someone with love letters and flowers. The nurturing is, I'm here for you. You know, so with the optimism, we'll get through it. And with the nurturing, it's I'm here for you. So what about this idea of debilitation, of Saturn being debilitated in the third house? You mentioned this, Kim, briefly, sort of talking about the idea between, focusing on their kind of like personal ideas. Can you say a little bit more about that, what you might think about that, Kim?
Yeah, it's sort of the rub of having Mars ruling your third house, where your friends and your peers are supposed to be. I always joke with my friends and say, I'm so grateful for you because it's so hard to be my friend.
Yes.
It's like, not only is there that rub, that Saturn-Mars, tension, but then on top of it, you have Aries in the third house. So it's always like, I need new friends. I'm sick of you. If Saturn's not working well, just need to constantly reinvent. And I think it makes a good point, like being able to prune like things that Saturn does to move on sort of to the bigger picture of Aquarius.
Right.
Interpersonal relationships, and on that level, it gets really tough.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, Desi, when you think about this, when we think about Saturn, so the Lord of Aquarius being debilitated in the third house, that's going to bring up all kinds of issues that's going to get an Aquarius person in trouble. So what kind of difficulties it comes to your mind when you think about a debilitated Saturnine energy in the third house?
So I'm thinking about lack of courage. Because where Saturn is, we often feel a sense of lack. With Mars, a person can be rigid in their beliefs, but more in their thinking pattern, they can be overthinking in a way that makes them feel stuck.
Right.
Because it's the combination of Mars and Saturn, and they can lash it out on their teammates, and this can derail them from them following the path of Saturn in the ninth.
Right, right, and that's a very good point. And when you start out with that, the idea of courage in particular, for an Aquarius ascendant, again, Kim brought up this idea of contrariness, and I don't mean to focus on that, but with an Aquarius ascendant being, what's that?
That's a big part of the Aquarius. It's a constant rub of just two sides to balance.
Right, and it's not necessarily that an Aquarius is being contrary. It's simply that, with the idea of Saturn being debilitated in the third and the idea of courage, they need to have the courage to stand up to their peers. To our courage, Desi, I think that's very important. And also, you brought up the idea of being too rigid in their thinking. When you're an Aquarius ascendant, there can be a strong sense of idealism there. What it really needs to be is tied into the exalted ninth house, where there's, again, that sense of caring and nurturing about slowly growing and contributing to the society, versus, with Saturn in the third debilitated, that quality, I have my own ideas, my own rigid thought patterns, and I want to enforce them on all the people around me. That's where things go wrong for an Aquarius ascendant. And again, Kim, you being an Aquarius ascendant, have you found that to be true in your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And there's a lot of Aquarians around me. And so it's like, I saw this meme in Twitter, Astro, and they're like, Aquarius will make you feel like you're the world, like you're the center of the world for a while, and they'll be so tight with you. And then it can just be done with nothing. And I think it's what Desi hit on. There's no courage. There's no, Saturn is the place of, lack of self-esteem. So if something's not holding up to the ideals that your friends aren't holding up to your ideals, then that's just it.
Right. So, right. And so one final thought before we finish up with this idea of Saturn and Aquarius ascendant is, again, it's easy for Saturn ruled ascendants to hear all the negative things that we have talked about and then focus on those negative things. If you have Saturn debilitated in the third, that doesn't mean you're out of luck, you're in trouble. There's plenty of other things in the chart that we could look at to see, is Saturn being helped by its friends? Desi mentioned Venus and Mercury. But the point of these videos isn't to get you fixated on what you have and how it's going to be horrible in that way. It's for you to go back and consider, what did we discuss related to Saturn's exaltation position? If Saturn was working in its highest capacity, if you're able to focus on that in this life now, no matter where Saturn is placed, you will start to work with that higher blueprint, the idea of having that Saturnine energy exalted in the ninth house, one of the greatest houses within the chart. So keep that in mind, and also stay tuned for the rest of the series on Aquarius, such that you can see how Venus and Mercury will be able to benefit. So we've got Desi and Kim joining us again for a few more videos, and they are astrological apprenticeship students, which means should they decide to go on to year 4, they will need to be doing some donation-based sessions, at least 42 of them, to complete the apprenticeship program. So if you want to know more about how to contact them, bookmark this video and come back in about 6 months from August of 2019, and I'll have a link there about how to contact them so that you can help them in their training as astrologers. So thank you for being here with me, Desi, and thank you for being here, Kim.
Thank you.